Hello there and welcome back to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, and in today's video I'm going to have a little bit of a chat about some of the spaceships we've set up, because there's been quite a lot of expansion from the very early days and I've not really talked about the new designs we've got going on. The first ship we made was the Maluna Transport, and this was one that Mike put together as a very basic ship to do the initial dragging of stuff back and forth between Maluna and Norvis. And this was a very simple basic ship using the basic technology that was available at the time. And initially we were bringing up the ice and the iron ore from the ground and bringing it up into this platform there in order to make all the fuel from it. However, since then we've seen some minor upgrades where we've put some grabbers on the front once we'd researched them with the space sciences we were getting from Maluna, and that's allowing it to then pick up the icy asteroid chunks and the metallic ones and the carbon ones, and then do appropriate things down here with them in order to make the fuel. And making fuel does require all three of them, because you get the iron ore out of the metallic ones, you get the water out of the ice that you get out of the oxide asteroid chunks, and then you need carbon for the actual fuel itself, which comes from the carbonic asteroids. But again, this is a very simple spaceship, and it's working well. This is one of the few cases where expanding the ship's routes has worked out absolutely fine, because originally it was set to just go between Maluna and Lignumis, and when it got to Maluna it was picking up the space science packs and apparently some aluminium just in case we ever need it anywhere. And then I thought, well, I need to bring over steam science from Lignumis, so let's add that one in, because they're all so close together. It takes almost no time at all to fly back and forth between them, and so that's why this one has worked. So it's then able to fly over to Lignumis, fill up with any of the science packs that are required from there, and then fly back over to Norvis and unload until it runs out of any one of the 3 science packs it's currently transporting, because after that it was expanded a little bit further to start bringing over the exploration science packs as well, also from Maluna. So it's still only doing the 2 planetoids, well the 3 if you count Norvis, but it's bringing over 3 science packs and also a few other things like silicon cells and electrical data cables in case we need that anywhere, and then it's capable of bringing data tapes back to Maluna if we ever decide that we want them, and I think we're getting fairly close to considering that at the moment. So this was an incredibly simple ship, and it did quite well. It didn't need any weapons across the front because it was only flying around in the Norvian sphere of influence where there's nothing remotely dangerous. But after that, we wanted to go a little bit further. And so Sophia built his first ship, the Richard Dean Anderson, because apparently he has a thing about naming them after science fiction actors, which is fair enough. It's as good a naming scheme as any, as long as you can keep track of which one's which. And this ship was originally designed to fly out to Vulcanus and back, which is a reasonably easy run. It's just one stop out along here. It's a reasonably long distance. It's 19,000 kilometers or 19 megameters. It's not too bad. It's not too time consuming. It's not too awkward. But there are the larger rocks out here. We can see the medium metallic asteroids, and so we need some sort of defense against those. And in order to defend against those, we need some sort of weaponry on the front. And so he's implemented gun turrets across this one, which makes sense because that was a technology we had at the time. And that means we need to bring in the ammunition, in this case yellow ammunition, because that's the easy one to make, and the only one that we had the technology to make at that time from stuff that's available in space. And so, because we're playing with Lignumis, we've got the telescopic ammunition recipe, which means we need to make the wooden ammunition in order to make the yellow ammunition. And making the wooden ammunition requires wood, and so we're growing that in these space gardens. And the space gardens require a certain amount of liquid fertilizer to be pumped in, but then they also generate bioslurry. And conveniently, you can recycle the bioslurry back into fertilizer by adding in some carbon and some water as well. And so essentially we're turning carbon and water into wood, which is basically how nature works. So I'm happy with that process. It hangs together nicely for me. And that's allowing us to produce a decent amount of wood. The only downside of this, for certain values of downside, is that it is taking up a fair amount of space on the spaceship. And so our initial early game spaceships have had to be a lot bigger than they are in vanilla. But, you know, it's an interesting extra challenge to have to put in there. As well as that, we've then got iron being made in order to allow us to produce the yellow ammunition down here, and because we're playing with hot metals, we need to have a loop in the belt down here that will mean that any iron that gets down to here and is still hot will be passed around again to radiate the rest of that heat off into space before it gets allowed through down here and passed on to the ammunition production. One of the things I quite like about Sophia's design here is this diagonal engine line along here, because it means plugging them all together is really easy, because when you put them together like this, all of the oxidizer inputs and outputs all line up perfectly, and then you can just run a fuel pipe along the back of it. So that's something I'd not seen before and hadn't thought in my own run through. So yeah, I really quite like that, and it's a nice little touch. Other than that, is there anything particularly spectacular going on here that I should talk about? We've got a decent amount of storage space. We've got grabbers at the front that are pulling in the various different types of rocks. And here we're monitoring what's on the belt. So we're seeing, reading off the belt contents, and as you can see, we've got some ammunition, we've got a load of space rocks. We're saying that if anything on the red input side, red anything, is less than green anything, then pass it out as 1 on the other side. That's quite interesting. That's a different way of doing it from the way I've often done these sort of things, where I've used maths to subtract one from the other. But this works really quite nicely. And so this is saying, for example, if the number of carbonic asteroids, 206, is less than the number of carbonic asteroid chunks we're aiming for on the green side, then it'll pass through a carbonic signal onto the other side, and we'll probably see that in a moment, because we've only got 201 of them right now, and we're probably using them up at a reasonable rate. But I'll pass it out along the output. There we go, like that, and then all the grabbers along the front will go nuts and go out and grab a load of the carbonic asteroid chunks and unload them onto the belt, where they can then be counted. So that's working nicely. It's giving us all the supplies we need, and they can then be crunched up down here. And we're using space crushers because that seemed like a good idea at the time. But the problem with space crushers is they have a quality bonus on them of 12.5%. So we're getting out sometimes, as you can see along here, we're getting out some higher quality bits and pieces, which we're then down binning unless we've already got plenty of those, and so we don't need them. And if there's anything we have an excess of, we can just chuck it out into space over the side. The ship does have a few gun turrets and grabbers down the sides as well for when it's stationary in orbit around a planet, but those are probably only going to be used a relatively small amount compared to the main ones on the front. Oh yes, and here you go, you can now see the hot metal actually being passed around here while it cools off a little bit. So I said this ship is doing the Vulcanus run, and it is. So it's going from Norvis to Vulcanus. It's also then going over to Lignumis, where it's picking up blue circuits, which you can then take over to Vulcanus, because making blue circuits on Vulcanus costs plastic, and we don't have an enormous amount of that available. So we reckoned it was worth it stopping by Lignumis, grabbing some of the blue circuits from there, although we do apparently need to boost the production of those, and then flying them over to Vulcanus to supply it. Previously, this ship was doing some other planets as well, and that was causing issues. At one point we had it doing Cubium and I think Castra as well, and it was struggling to keep up with all of those. And so recently we've expanded a little bit. We've made some extra ships to go out and do those separate runs. And this is something I was talking a bit about at the end of the last series, but it's something we have now implemented, and the system is working much more nicely because of it. And I think that's basically everything to say about this ship. I'm not sure why it flies out to Maluna, but apparently it does. Yes, it's doing the Norvis Vulcanus run, but while it's at Norvis, it's doing a couple of other things in Norvis' sphere of influence, in case there's anything important lying around there. You can see it's got some options set up in here still for the Cubium pickup options for when it used to go out to Cubium and pick up cubes and dream concentrates. It no longer does that, but the options are still in there. We'll probably clear those out at some point, but it doesn't actually matter, because if it never gets to Cubium, this is never going to actually affect it. Our third ship was Tristan's one, and this is the Dynamic Storyteller's Incredible Conveyance, and if you recognise the reference in that name, I should be quite impressed and very, very pleased. This, as you can see, is very, very similar to Sophia's ship. It's in fact, it's a direct copy-paste of it, except there are some minor tweaks made to, I think, add a little bit more storage, by adding this wiggly belt on over here, giving him a bit more space for storing ammunition and chunks. Apparently, that needed to be done. And if I take a copy of Sophia's ship, and then try and paste it in over Tristan's ship, you can see how similar they are. We've got those extra belts on the side over there. It looks like Sophia's ship has been made slightly taller since this copy was made, and a load of extra storage space has been put in the gap. So Tristan's ship has a bit less of space available for cargo, but is slightly shorter. I don't think that really matters. Other than that, it's running on exactly the same sort of general principles. This ship was originally designed to fly out to Igris, which is why it has a magic-related name, because Igris is the magical planet. And so, it flies out there, it'll stock up on all of the magic fluid that's required for advanced science production to be done on various other planets, and then from Igris it'll fly past Vulcanus, all the way back to Norvis, where it can then sit there making sure it's got enough ammunition and unload as much as is required. Then it'll fly back onto Vulcanus again, and then back to Igris. So it keeps going round and around that loop. And then apparently also over to Corundum as well. So this ship picks up the big mining drills from Vulcanus. It then picks up the science packs and the magic fluid and the tesseracts and the magic pump jacks, all from Igris. When it gets to Corundum, it'll pick up the science packs and some platinum and also some of the catalytic chemical plants, although it doesn't seem to have any of those on board at the moment. Maybe it's been unloading all of those when it gets to Norvis, I'm not quite sure. And also, when it's at Norvis, it'll also grab in some ammunition if it can as well, to help top it up so it's able to fly off a bit more quickly, rather than just making it from the resources found in space. It also picks up any empty barrels for the magic fluid as well, and takes those back to Igris, which is quite important because the magic fluid barrels are quite expensive to make, and so we'd like to be able to ship them back over there. It also takes over science labs to Igris. That's less important now, but I think those are an important ingredient for the science enhancer machine. So yeah, we need to have a steady supply of those over there because we don't have any iron on Igris, which means making these things is going to be rather tricky. And so that ship is doing quite well. It's basically handling the Igris and Corundum side of the system over here, and it seems to be keeping up with that. So maybe each ship can actually handle 2 planets. So this one's doing Igris and Corundum, but when we tried to get the Richard Dean Anderson to do Vulcanus, Cubium, and Castra, that was a bit too much. It's hard to say exactly where the line is, but the dynamic storyteller does seem to be working reasonably well. On a similar note, Tristan made another one of these copy-paste ships. This looks like a direct copy of the dynamic storyteller, and this one is bringing the magic fluid from Igris to apparently possibly Norvis, but mostly to Lignumis, and unloading it over there because Tristan did an upgrade over on Lignumis to start making the steam science in the science enhancer machines, which means we're getting that lovely 150% productivity bonus, and that's probably why we've now got enough science packs here. But in return for that, he also needs to start bringing in the magic fluid. And so that's being transported over on this ship. As you can see here, we are requesting magic fluid, and we're also requesting the empty barrel, so those are being shipped both ways. And it's flying via Vulcanus. We've got a brief stop there programmed in, apparently. I think that's just to make sure it takes the correct route out there. And then it'll get to Igris, where it can do some unloading. It'll also sit there until it's satisfied, and then it'll fly back again via Vulcanus and via Norvis, apparently, where it'll load up with some more ammunition before it goes over to Lignumis, unloads the magic fluid, and will pick up any of the barrels that are waiting for it there, and then heads back off out to Igris again. I may be slightly out of sequence here, but one of the other ships that was built at a similar sort of time, or possibly a little bit sooner actually, was the Lime. And this is Mark's ship, so it's called Lime because lime is his colour. And this is what we call the seeding ship. And the idea is this ship will fly out to any planet where we're trying to get a base set up, and then it has all of the stuff on board that we could need to start building up a base. So we've got loads and loads of belts and undergrounds and inserters and pipes and pylons and rail and vehicles and roboports, cliff explosives, power generations facilities, crushers, assembly machines, all of the things you can need to get a base up and running. And in theory, this has got everything we need. Occasionally we add new stuff to it, especially when we've been out to a new planet. So for example, we now have rocket turrets on it that we've got from Gleba, we have lightning turrets from Fulgora, we have combat roboports from Castra, and so on and so on. So the idea is that we can fly out with this ship to any planet that we want to expand onto, and then it can drop down all the bits and pieces that we're going to need in order to build stuff up on that planet. And so far that's been going very, very well. Sometimes it needs to be sent off to go and get things, but that's okay, that's how the system works. And the ship is designed using a series of interrupts, and this means it's a little bit more manual to send it to places, but then it has to be because we don't know where we're necessarily going to go. And so, for example, so it's sitting here at Norvis without really anywhere else to go. But when this completes, it will then just go back to Norvis because that's the only place it can go, because it's the only destination it has listed. But when it does that, it will then look at all of the interrupts over here, because technically it's sort of leaving the planet at that point. And so, for example, when it leaves a planet, if there's a shortage of fuel, then it will fly to Maluna, because Maluna is a good place to try and pick up some rocks and bits and pieces and try and make a load more fuel and a load more ammunition. And it will sit there until it's refueled and rearmed, and then it'll be ready to leave again and go off to wherever else it's needed. Now, ideally, this would never trigger, because when it's flying through space, hopefully it will be pulling in enough asteroid chunks that it will be able to keep itself nicely fueled and nicely armed. And so this shouldn't ever trigger, but if necessary, it can trigger and take the ship off to go and refuel. Then we've got all of these one-time options down here. So, for example, if I wanted to go out to Vulcanus because I was trying to build something over there and I needed an enormous quantity of blue belts, for example. Actually, belts is a bad example. I needed a load of diagonal inserters, which we're not making on Vulcanus. Then I could trigger this one, and that just flies out to Vulcanus, and it will sit there while we unload stuff from it until it's had 30 seconds of inactivity, and then it will automatically fly back to Norvis to restock and then be ready for anyone else who needs it. All the one times are the same, but also if it starts to run out of things, then it can fly off to those planets as well. So if we look at this one, if any of the planet imports that come from Norvis are 0, then it will automatically fly over to Norvis and restock. And similarly for all of the other ones, if the same's true for Vulcanus and so on and so on. So if I drop all of the diagonal inserters down onto Norvis, because we're there at the moment, there we go, so I've emptied all of those out, and then let's change this to 12 seconds. Because I want the ship to demonstrate how this works. Then you see it's automatically left and it's heading over to Igris in order to go and get some more of those diagonal inserters because those ran out. And so this means if we're actually setting up a new planet, we can add in an additional station and tell the ship to wait there for an arbitrary amount of time, or we could steal the Norvis one and reprogram it. And then if the ship runs out of anything, it will automatically fly off, go and get more of that stuff, and then come back to the planet where we're doing the building work. So it's all really quite clever and really quite automated. We also finally, at the bottom of the list, we have the Grand Tour option, and I think I put this one in. I think I vaguely remember Mark tasking me with this one. And the idea here is the ship will then fly around all of the planets that it gets stuff from, and it will wait at each one until all the requests have been satisfied. So this ensures that the ship has got all of the resources it needs in order to keep everything supplied. And this is deliberately done in what was intended to be a fairly sensible order. So Vulcanus, Igris, Corundum, Castra, Gleba is basically going around the loop up here. Vulcanus, Igris, Corundum, Castra, Gleba. We don't really need to pick stuff up from Cubium with the line because there isn't any machinery coming from there. Then it heads down to Fulgora because that's bloomin' miles away, and then off to Norvis because that's the final planet to go back to make sure it's got everything. So Fulgora is then right down here, and then it'll head back over to Norvis. After dropping off supplies, the ship can end up requesting a lot of different items from Norvis, but that's okay. Our rocket launch system can cope. So I guess as we go out to more and more planets and have more and more machinery being made on other planets, then we're going to need to carry on extending that Grand Tour option just to make sure we have absolutely everything. And you'll note that in theory the Grand Tour shouldn't be needed, because if you run out of anything, the ship will go over and go and get more of the stuff from that planet automatically. But this is quite nice if you're about to do a jaunt out to a new planet and you want to make sure it's absolutely completely full of absolutely everything you're going to want, rather than just going, oh, we'll head over there with whatever we've got, and if we run out of belts after dropping 100 down, then it can go off and get some more, because that would be really annoying. Continuing on the Mark theme, he also produced the two twin ships, Gleba Imports and Gleba Exports. And these two are identical designs, and Mark wanted to do something a little bit different here, so these are all laser ships. And it turns out lasers can actually deal with medium asteroids. It takes them a moment or two to manage to destroy them, but it does work if you've got a decent number of them, and this is quite a lot of them. Also, lasers have a reasonable range. It'd be quite nice to upgrade some of these to higher quality ones to get them a slightly longer range, but it works. We won't criticise it, because it does work. But the thing is with that is lasers are quite power hungry. So instead of producing large amounts of ammunition, instead he's got a pair of nuclear reactors on this ship, which obviously bring in nuclear fuel, and then they produce large amounts of heat, which can then be fed down the heat pipes, and we've got heat exchangers and condenser turbines along here. And the point of a condenser turbine is that it doesn't waste all of the steam that goes into it and blow it off. Some of it gets turned into cooled steam at a mere 100 degrees, which has very little energy left in it, but can, if you have some chemical plants, and here's one down here that's doing the process, and apparently it only requires one, so we don't need to condense all that much of it. It can then be condensed back down into water, and the water can of course then be fed back into the heat exchangers to go back around the loop. Now the system is not 100% efficient, unfortunately, so we're not getting back all of the water that's being used, blown off as steam. That will improve in time with more and more research is done into this technology, but at the moment we're only getting back a relatively small proportion of it. But that is enough to take the edge off and allow us to then keep the ship supplied by bringing in the ice crystals down here, turning them into ice, then passing them down here to be melted into water. We are once again using the down binners because we're using space crushers. We could probably use electric crushers or maybe even big crushers on here, but we haven't switched over to that yet. He has, however, started using the catalytic chemical plants, which is nice because they run faster. They are a little bit of a faff to wire up some of the inputs and outputs, although in this case, because there's only one fluid input and one fluid output, they're actually okay. And so that's allowing him to make the fuel and the oxidizer. He's got a similar sort of little diagonal set up down here, and that's enough to keep the ship flying. Another interesting difference with these ships is that they don't have perimeter belts around them for asteroid chunks and ammunition. Instead, the chunks are just gathered at the front and a few from down the sides, and then offered up to the fuel production system at the bottom, and then just thrown overboard if they're not required. Looking at the instructions on this ship is the Gleba Import, so this one brings stuff to Gleba from the other planets. And he's done it again with the interrupt system over here, so basically it's bringing in calcite to this planet, and it also needs nuclear fuel to keep itself running. So when it runs out of calcite, it will automatically head off to Vulcanus to pick some up from there. And if it runs out of nuclear fuel, then it will automatically head off to Norvis to pick some up from there. Well, I say runs out, if it gets to less than 10. And so, at the moment, we're not getting through an enormous amount of calcite on Gleba, so it's not doing very much. So let's have a look at the Gleba Exports instead, which is basically, as I said, the same design of ship, but this one is carrying all of the stuff from Gleba to Norvis as required. So we're shipping over the agricultural science packs and the bioflux. and it's flying back and forth to make sure we've got enough of those. It'll fly over to Gleba, it'll make sure it's got at least some agricultural science pack, then it'll fly back over to Norvis. All of this is about to spoil by the looks of it, which is a bit of a shame. I imagine we've got a request on Norvis that's going to pull any spoilage out of the ship and just dispose of it down on planet. But the idea is that it will leave Norvis if it ever runs out of either bioflux or agricultural science packs, and at the moment we're getting through a lot of bioflux for reasons that I'll get into in a later video. The reason I wanted to switch over to this ship is so that we can see all the lasers working, and as you can see, a big lump of lasers at the front of the ship like this is quite capable of dealing with all the rocks that are coming in. I'm slightly surprised at the design here. Personally, if I'd been building it, I'd have had a wider bank of lasers going across the middle, but oh no, I think this was deliberate actually, because this way you're not protecting the ship against too far out from the sides, so your lasers don't need to constantly destroy rocks like this one that's going to miss it by miles. If you've got them all in the middle, then they're just protecting the actual ship itself. So in a way, that's actually quite good. It means you're not wasting as much power and energy. So that's actually a really good thing. You also note that we've got the Disco Lasers mod installed. So as the rocks come in and the lasers start firing, they're all slightly different colours. Now they all seem to be shades of blue at the moment. I don't know exactly how it decides what colour the lasers should be. Let's pull a few of them out along here and then put them back in again. And see if they come out, see if they start firing in different colours. No, they're all still blue. I don't know how the lasers decide what colour they want to be, but it seems that blue is a very fashionable colour at the moment. So I was hoping for a little bit more variety from them there, but never mind. We can now take a look at Mike's ship, which is actually too big to fit the entire thing on screen in one go, which I feel is quite an achievement there. The whole thing is, as you can see, very, very solar powered, so enormous quantities of solar panels just covering the whole thing, and very, very good strong defences all the way around three sides of the outside to make sure that he doesn't get any rocks sneaking up on him even from the sides. This is another one that's running on bullet weapons, so we've got the traditional set of space gardens in the middle here to make the wood to be made into ammunition, and to make the seeds to make the wood as well, of course. And we're producing the fertilizer across the bottom. This is very, very similar to the Sophia's first design, the one I showed you a little bit earlier. It's using the same ideas, but with a rather different sort of layout and setup. And you can see all of the accumulators seem to have run out of power, so I guess we're not actually generating as much power on the ship as it looks like. Or perhaps because it's flying all the way out to Fulgora and there's not as much solar power available there. Maybe that's the reason it's having problems. And that would make a lot of sense as to why Mike has quite so many solar panels on the ship and why it's quite so big and blocky. And out of curiosity, let's have a look at the electric networks. So yeah, we can see here that he's not actually producing very much electricity at all. The ship is really, really struggling, but I believe that's because there's a solar dead spot near the Stargate, which we'll explore properly much later on. In the meantime, some of the solar could be replaced with a nuclear system, but that's potential for the future. Or the ship could go via Tiber instead of the Stargate, which would remove that problem in exchange for forcing us to discover Tiber a little earlier than we're really intending to. But because gun turrets don't really require power, apart from to load the ammunition into them, and maybe he's got enough fuel backed up in the tanks over here, it's kind of okay. And if it isn't okay, well then the ship will just sort of stop and generate a little bit more power and get things running again until it is okay. Yeah, it's slightly odd. I think this ship could perhaps do with either a lot of efficiency modules, because oh yes, look at all these speed modules down here. It could do with either some efficiency modules or perhaps a nuclear power plant or two on board. But never mind, it does mostly work. We have had to stop it a couple of times when it's picked up damage over here on the front left corner, because this belt over here it isn't bringing the ammunition over fast enough, and the guns at the far end of it tend to get a little bit starved for ammunition. But it mostly works. It is happily transporting the science packs from Fulgora over to Norvis, and I say the science pack and a load of other stuff besides. So he's also bringing over all of the bits and pieces that are made on Fulgora that we might need on Norvis, such as EM plants. We definitely need those. Then we've got some of the intermediates here, the holmium, the superconductors and the supercapacitors. I'm not sure those are quite as necessary, or at least I don't think we've really started using those on Norvis yet. But then there's also the science packs, which we definitely need lots of, and the lightning turrets, we need lots of those, and lightning ammo, maybe we need some of that as well. And this is good for bringing them over to Norvis, because we are doing quite a lot of expansion on Norvis. It's going to be using things like the EM plants. So maybe we should actually be having more than 50 EM plants being brought over at a time. I don't know, I'm not going to mess around with this too much. But we're doing a lot of expansion over there, so it's good to have the recyclers and the EM plants there in large quantities, because we don't want the lime to necessarily be bringing those over. The lime should be mostly dealing with new planets. And so anything that goes from an exoplanet to Norvis should come in on that planet's main ship. And so that's exactly what's happening here. We also also have stops at Maluna and Lignumis, which allows the ship to pick up some asteroid chunks in a safe environment like this. There's no big asteroids that are going to come in and do it any damage. It also goes off to Igris, which is quite important because Fulgora has also been set up to use the enhanced science machines, so it needs to go to Igris to pick up a load of the magic fluid and take that over. At the moment it's got plenty of it. This is perhaps somewhere where the interrupt, like Mark has been using, would be quite useful. But the problem with that is that Fulgora is miles away in the opposite direction, so you don't want the ship to go from Norvis to Fulgora to Igris to Fulgora. You want it to go via Norvis for all its journeys, which it kind of does. And maybe we could set up an interrupt to do that. In fact, we could set up an interrupt to do that, but I think it may be fairly complicated to decide when to leave some of the other planets. Do you have the ship sit at Norvis in order to unload the science packs, or do you have it sit on Fulgora to make sure there's always enough magic fluid over there? It's kind of hard to say, and I haven't thought of a particularly good answer to that yet, so that's something that's probably going to need some additional pondering, or maybe just a bit of a redesign. We'll see how it goes. The final and probably most complex ship that I want to look at is Sophia's latest one, and this is the Edward James Olmos, and I think he's a Battlestar Galactica actor, but I shall have to look that one up and confirm. And you can see here we've got Sophia's similar sort of design. We've got this nice diagonal shape at the front and at the back, which I quite like. It gives the ships a certain style and makes them look a bit different from the flying bricks that I've been tending to make. And this ship has a lot of extra things on it because the technology has advanced significantly since the Richard Dean Anderson was made. And I'm going to start at the beginning with this. So we are grabbing in chunks of asteroid from space in exactly the same way that we have been with other ships, but instead of passing it around on the ammo belt, it's then being put onto the underground belts here to feed it onto a belt down here. So fine, we've got a belt running around the outside of the ship that carries all of the asteroid chunks. However, you'll notice there's a lot of flickering going on the machines over here, as if they're having a bit of indecision about what they're supposed to be doing. And that's because they're all hooked up to something that's watching what's on the belt and is then saying, well, if we're short of certain types of asteroid, then we can reprocess them in these large crushers. And that allows, in this case, we're doing sometimes we're doing metallic, sometimes we're doing carbonic asteroid reprocessing here. But don't worry, it won't start running until the inserters kick in, and that'll happen when it's a lot more out of balance. And that takes in one type of asteroid chunk and then outputs, well, there's a 40% chance of getting the same thing back, and then 20% chances of getting either of the other two out. And you'll notice that those only add up to 80%, and that means we're getting less stuff out than we're putting in. Now, we did wonder at one point whether the large crushers, because these have a productivity bonus of plus 50%, we did wonder whether that would mean we'd be getting extra free stuff out, but I'm pretty sure we decided that that's not the case, that this recipe doesn't accept a productivity bonus, so we're still only getting 80% out. And so the idea behind these is that if we only have one type of asteroid chunk coming in, we can then rebalance it by turning those asteroid chunks into the other types of asteroid chunks in order to keep absolutely everything running. The next step is taking those asteroid chunks and doing something useful with them. So you can see here, for example, we've got a set of splitters, so we're pulling off the metallic chunks from the belt, passing them to here to see if this belt wants them, and if it doesn't, then we'll pass them back onto the belt down here to go around and potentially be reprocessed, and to allow, in theory, to allow the system to keep flowing, but I noticed that the port side of the belt has got jammed. But I'm not sure whether that really matters. I think it might matter a little bit, actually, so it's probably slightly problematic. Maybe there should be a side balancer going on somewhere on this belt. Anyway, those are then being brought in down here, where they can go through the advanced asteroid processing recipe, and that means a metallic asteroid chunk can be turned into iron ore, crushed iron, copper ore, stone, and potential chance of getting a metallic asteroid chunk back again, which is far more complicated than what we had going on before, but it does give us a lot more extra outputs instead of just the iron and chance of the asteroid chunk back. Similar things have happened with the carbonic chunks over here, where we're now getting carbon as before, and the carbonic chunks back sometimes, but we're also getting sulfur and coal out, both of which are very, very useful. And over here, we're doing the same thing once again with the oxide asteroid crushing, where instead of just getting ice and sometimes the asteroid chunks back, we're also now getting calcite and sand out, which we also need to deal with those, but also those are valuable resources that can be used in all kinds of places. And so all of these systems are working in more or less the same way, where any unprocessed asteroid chunks are dumped back out onto this belt here, where they'll then flow down here. We've got an underground belt acting as to just take things off one side of the belt here, and then they're passed around. There's a green belt bringing them all the way back up here. Oh, and then feeding them back in at the top. So just go round and round in circles. Fine, fair enough. That works quite nicely. And presumably, yes, they're going to end up on the port side of this belt, which means they come around here, they'll end up on the port side. That means they won't get used up. But if we do have too many of them, they can then still be dumped out onto the belt over here, so it'll in theory get rid of them. Maybe that's why this belt is jammed up. That would make a certain amount of sense. Something for Sophia to have a look at, perhaps. But yes, you'll also notice that because the big crushers don't have a built-in quality bonus, in fact they've got a minus 2.5% quality bonus because they've got speed modules in them, we don't have to do any down binning of all the stuff that comes out along here. And so we're feeding out the coal and the sulfur and the carbon. I'm not sure why he's got separate inserters doing this. Maybe it's so they can always pick up a full hand at a time, so they're not sort of picking up little bits and passing it across. I'm not sure, but it seems to be working. And so that's being then filtered out down here, where the sulfur is being passed off, the coal is being passed off, and then we've got the carbon. And we've got loads and loads of carbon, which is coming down to be presumably made into fuel in the normal way. And then also passed down here, where we appear to be making it into we're making it into blue rockets, which we've actually stopped using, but shush. And we're using the sulfur to make sulfuric acid, and we're also making solid fuel, and that is coming from over here. Oh, how is this happening? Okay, so we've got solid fuel being made from light oil, we've got light oil being made from heavy oil, and heavy oil being made from, I see, coal liquefaction. So the coal that comes in, we are then turning into heavy oil. We're using the simple coal liquefaction because we have the resources for it, and that's been making this into heavy oil, which is then being made into light oil and into solid fuel down here. Fine, okay, that makes sense. This also requires a quantity of yellow rockets to be made. Those are being made up here, yes, and they're going through down binners to make sure they're all at standard quality. Fair enough. And that requires iron, well, you've seen the iron coming in, and it requires explosives, which are being made just over here from sulfur and coal dust and so on. So this all comes together to allow him to make the yellow the yellow and blue rockets. And initially he was feeding these blue rockets out and feeding them out to all of the rocket launchers around the edge of the ship. Unfortunately, it turns out the blue rockets are a little bit too powerful, and they were causing a bit of collateral damage. So sometimes an asteroid would be shot when it got to about here with a blue rocket, and the splash damage would damage this asteroid collector up here. So this is why there are some extra guns up here to try and make sure anything gets destroyed before it gets too close. But also as another safety feature, Sophia has switched the whole thing over to using the yellow rockets, which don't do any splash damage at all. They are simply, well, I won't call it, say, impact. They do it because they do explosive damage, but they don't do it with splash damage. So these are all firing out only at the big asteroids, should we ever see any of those. And the theory is that this ship should be now capable of flying anywhere in the solar system, well, at least out as far as Aquilo. Beyond that, we don't really know because, well, who knows? We might get huge asteroids on the run out from Pelagos to Secretus, and who knows what's going to be going on out here. Probably, I imagine it's going to be much more difficult out here. But we haven't researched this yet, so whilst I probably could find out from the Factoriopedia, I'm not going to go and look because that feels mildly cheaty. Having calcite being captured from the oxide asteroids over here means that we can then start to use the smelting recipes using the foundries. So we've got iron happening over here, we've got copper happening over here, and that means we can be that bit more efficient, and we can also use the big crushers to get the bit of extra efficiency, or productivity rather, from that. And that allows us to pipe the molten metal down here. Well, okay, we're making lots and lots of iron as well, and I'm sure we must be making steel as well as copper. Because down here we're making steel and copper in order, and then the wooden ammunition in order to make the wooden ammunition, to make the yellow ammunition, to make the red ammunition, and all of that is working together in a reasonably friendly, happy way. And once again, we are as usual using down binners to make sure it's all standard quality ammunition. The red stuff we could probably allow to be upgraded, and then some of the turrets would decide they wanted to switch over to tier 2 or tier 3 ammunition, but it's a little bit risky because they might not be enough flowing around, they might run out of the good stuff, and it might all jam up a bit. So it's a lot safer just to have the normal ammunition coming through here rather than trying to get quality stuff. But it's still worth using the forges because that still gives us a 25% productivity bonus, which means less resources are used. Now, Sophia has been kind enough to give me some numbers, and we all like numbers, don't we? So this ship produces 12.5 red ammunition per second, and it needs a lot of it because it's a fast ship. That said, red ammunition is so powerful and effective that it is producing far more than it needs. But, you know, it's good to have a bit of excess just in case it goes somewhere where the asteroids are a bit thicker. It can produce 5.4 blue rockets a second or 4.35 yellow rockets a second, and once again, that's more than sufficient because we're just actually straight up not using them at the moment. He also has laser turrets tucked in along here. Those are firing against small asteroids. And there's also 2 gun turrets that will also fire against small asteroids up here. And then the gun turrets are being used to fire against medium and large, and rockets also will fire against large. So it's a good balance between using different types of turrets for different types of asteroid, always trying to play to the asteroid's weaknesses. Because, as we've seen in the past when we've looked at these things in the last series, small asteroids have a very low resistance to laser, so lasers are effective against them. Fire, not at all, but actually bullet would be also very effective against them, but laser is free in inverted commas and doesn't burn ammunition, so we might as well use them for that. The medium ones have a very low resistance against physical, so bullets are good against those. They also have quite a low resistance against explosions, so we could use rockets against them, but when the bullets are so effective, we might as well stick with those, because bullets are, once again, much, much cheaper. Then the big asteroids, they have really high physical and laser protection, so there's almost no chance of any damage being done by bullets. A bullet would need to do 2,000 damage to even scratch the surface of the thing, although then it would only take it to lose 10% of its effectiveness. And as we can see over here, our bullets are currently doing about 72 damage, so they actually would literally not even scratch the surface of the big asteroids. The lasers would barely warm them up as well, because they have a 95% resistance there, but they only have a 10% resistance to explosion damage, so which is why we've been talking about using the rockets against those. The rockets will be quite effective against the big asteroids. The next step up is huge asteroids. We'll look at them another time, I think, when they're a bit more relevant, because they're a very long way off for us at the moment. Additionally, he has built the ship with platinum thrusters, and that's one of the toys we got from Corundum, and these produce a lot more thrust than the standard ones do. But they burn more fuel, but they produce more thrust, and this is why this ship is so much faster, and allows it to fly at top speed at over 400 kilometers a second, compared to other ships. The Richard Dean Anderson managed 170 and the Line managed 270, so a significant amount slower. He says it also contains plenty of storage, and yes, I would agree with that. There's loads of it available over here, and if we look inside, we can see that there's, still lots and lots of headroom in there. He can fit a lot more junk in this ship if he needs to. And apparently everything is built to ratio, so we're producing the right amount of brown ammo to make yellow ammo to make red ammo, and so on everywhere else around the ship. So well done there, that's a nice idea. I often tend to just throw more and more machines at things until they work well enough, so although I'm getting slightly better about that. It also overproduces on calcite, and some of that is being stored in the whole storage area down here. So you can see there's quite a lot of calcite in here. And he says that's being stocked up on as much as required, but will just be thrown overboard, probably like this, just like this, along with the sand, if we get too much of it. So he says he'd like to work on the speed control for this ship a bit. At the moment, there are some pumps along here that are passing the fluids through. And interestingly, I see that we've got 4 pushing oxidizer downwards and 1 pulling it back out of the system. So presumably the controls on here, is meant to keep this at an appropriate level to keep the speed so we have a bit of control over the speed. I don't think it's working, and nor does he, so that's something that needs to be worked on. He's got some controls and things over here that I think are the first step in trying to get that working, but I'm not sure it's properly set up and doing everything that it should yet. So we'll let him explain a bit once it's finished, and then I'll bring it up in another video. And so that covers our fleet. There are a couple of other ships that have been made that are either absolutely trivial or are virtually identical copies of ones I've already talked about. But this is what we've got at the moment, and they seem to be working quite well. All the sciences are being brought back to Norvis, and everything seems to be hanging on reasonably well as far as I can tell, at least on the spaceship front. I'm sure there are a bajillion other problems that we're going to need to go in and fix. So come along on 7:30 PM UK time on Monday to see us trying to work on those problems, trying to fix them ourselves, and get everything up and working. As of recording this, we are currently finishing off Gleba to an extent, and then thinking about doing some other upgrades around the rest of the system before we start thinking about what the next planet to go off to will be, but I'm sure there'll be another new planet coming out quite soon. If you'd like to give this a shot yourself, then you can grab the Planetary Pioneers mod from the Factorio mod portal. If you use the seed 11111 for your initial map, then you will end up playing in the same universe as us, at least in theory. The mods have been updated a bit, so I can't guarantee it, but in theory it should be the same seed. If you do give it a try, come along to the Discord and let us know how you're getting on, or maybe drop some comments in under the video to let us know. We're certainly really enjoying this, and I don't know if we're doing the planets in the right order. Maybe we should have done Cubium later. I think that's now recommended, but we didn't know that at the time. But yeah, as I say, let us know how you're getting on. I'll be back again on Wednesday at 8 PM to carry on with Foundry. I feel like I'm getting quite close to the end of that, but they keep adding in more and more content, which is really quite nice, because I'm very much enjoying the game, but it is delaying going off and playing something else. Not that that is remotely a bad thing. These videos will also be coming out every Thursday and Friday, so please make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any of those. Thank you very much for watching, hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.